There's an astronomical amount of content packed into Far Cry 6, and in my opinion, this is the best game in the franchise since Far Cry 2 on the PlayStation 3. But at the end of the day, it is still a Far Cry game, and things will get a little bit grindy and repetitive, but the beauty of the island and the satisfaction of sniping enemies from across the map will make up for it. Let's get it. Alrighty, Stallions, welcome to the Gamer Heaven. I am your host, AK40 Kevin. We're going to jump right into the Stiffy Meter game review. I have my phone out here, not because I'm texting on the job, but because I have some notes pulled up here that I was pausing my game on the PS5 and typing in as they popped into my head, so I didn't forget anything. Now, I did allude to the fact that I played this game on PlayStation 5, however, it is playable on PS4, Xbox One, Xbox Series S and X, PC, as well as streaming from Google Stadia and Amazon Luna. And that brings me into the first topic of this game review, which is going to be performance, which is quite interesting. PC performance was actually rather underwhelming, and the primary reason for this would be the fact that it does offer ray tracing and some severe graphical settings, but does not offer DLSS or deep learning super sampling on NVIDIA cards to counteract and kind of bring the frame rate back up. They do offer AMD's Fidelity FX, which is kind of the equivalent of DLSS, but it's not as good. It's not there yet. And the real surprise here is that it actually runs more fluid and better on consoles, i.e. the Series X and the PlayStation 5. Obviously, the Xbox One and PS4 are going to have to taper back on performance because, well, that's 7.5-year-old hardware. From what I have heard, Google Stadia as well as Amazon Luna offer a little bit of input lag or delay, which can be incredibly frustrating for a first-person shooter. And the Series S does run quite good. However, it does taper back on draw distance, which is quite noticeable considering the island is rather large, and also some of the textures lack detail and quality up close. So starting with graphics, this game is graphically beautiful, and I think that is primarily because of the environment. You are in a jungle/rainforest environment that is basically representative of South America, which has always been one of my favorite video game environments. I also like desert dunes and snowy environments, but something about a rainforest, the thick foliage of brush that you can use as a stealth piece to sneak around looks very, very good. And this game, from a distance, when you're looking at these large vistas where you're staring out over the water and whatnot, this game looks beautiful. Now, there are a couple of times where the game looks less than impressive, and that is when you are looking at textures close up. So you're staring at a wall, a car. You'll notice that it's not the most beautiful game up close, which can kind of take away from the immersion of how pretty the game truly is as a whole, especially when you look at the large scope and scale of the map. Something very interesting to note about the graphics in this game is that the cutscenes are actually a lower resolution or texture quality, and the frame rate's pretty skippy or glitchy, which is interesting because usually, traditionally, historically, games have had better graphics during the cutscenes and then the gameplay would be not as pretty. That is actually reversed or flip-flopped here, where the gameplay's beautiful, but then you get into a cutscene and it looks kind of wonky. And I think I've cracked the Da Vinci Code on this and figured it out for us. I've solved the equation here. I believe it is because they are using the same assets or the same cutscenes across all platforms. So it looks like what's playing on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One is literally the quality of cutscenes you're going to get on a PlayStation 5, Series X, or PC. Because during a lot of the cutscenes, it gets literally skippy or glitchy where the frame rate is dipping quite low and the textures just look kind of last gen. Next up, the audio design is probably some of the best I have ever heard, especially in a console game. You are able to easily pinpoint enemy locations based on their audio cues, literally what surface they're stepping on, and also it is so detailed that if an enemy is wearing flip-flops, for example, you can literally hear not only the flip-flop hitting the ground, but then also the shoe snapping on the heel, which is pretty insane. Not to mention you'll hear the rustling of wind through the trees and rain pitter-pattering on rooftops. It's impressive. The soundtrack is a bunch of spicy Cuban music, which was kind of hard for me to digest. I didn't have any Pepto-Bismol or Tums on station, and it was a little bit too spicy for me and just really wasn't my flavor. However, you can turn off the music while you're in vehicles. It adds to the immersion of the environment that you're in, which is, like I said, South America, Cuba, but it just didn't resonate with me on a personal level. As for the story, in my opinion, it is very, very good. It is in-depth and has many layers to it. I'm not going to spoil anything whatsoever. This is a spoiler-free review. However, I'm going to wrap it up or summarize it for you guys real quick. Basically, there is a savage dictator played by the cover man, Giancarlo Esposito, and we will talk more about his personal performance as a voice actor here in a little bit. However, he more or less has found a cure for cancer, but at the cost of the lives, literally the lives, of a lot of the lower class citizens, which you have to keep in mind, there's a lot of poverty in this area. So experimenting on a lot of the citizens in order to get this cure or vaccine for cancer. He's also trying to teach his young boy or son these harsh lessons of how cruelty can actually be beneficial for the greater good of their people. However, he's very harsh. I'm not going to be saying he's winning Father of the Year award anytime soon, as he does some quite brutal things in front of his boy. And generally, he is a savage, heartless asshole. Now, I will say Giancarlo Esposito does a pretty good job here. However, this is probably his least good performance when you look at him playing Gus in Breaking Bad, and then Moffat Gideon in Mandalorian. This actor is literally one of the best villains that you will find in multimedia. And with this game, I don't know if it's just because he was underutilized or the script wasn't written directly for him, or because it is his first time doing voice acting for a video game, but you look at people like Nolan North, who played Nathan Drake in the Uncharted series, and they are literally perfect for that part. And don't get me wrong, he does a very good job, but I felt like he could never really get into his creative flow with this part. And while he is very good, and I will say he was correctly cast for this part, it just never had that same punch or flair as his parts in Breaking Bad and The Mandalorian. Next up, I need to mention the sheer amount of content that is packed in this game. It is literally overwhelming when you first start the game and you're like, holy crap. You start going through the menus, literally everything is customizable on your character, on your car, on your weapons, on your amigo, which is basically your pet that follows you around, whether you have an attack gator or you have the cute little puppy chorizo. Plus, once you get through the primary story or campaign, which is roughly 25 to 30 hours, there is literally, I would say, close to 100 hours of additional content with side quests, side activities, and a lot of them are actually really fun, like the cockfights, which, by the way, there's been a little bit of controversy from the animal rights people and whatnot. If it makes you feel any better, I'm 99% sure that cockfights are legal in South America, but that little mini game is actually really fun. Think of it like a fighting game, but with birds. But you can spend dozens of hours after the primary campaign has wrapped up, taking over enemy encampments, collecting collectibles. Yeah, that's what you do with collectibles, Kevin. And exploring the vast island and all of the activities that are packed into it, which is very important for me because I did spend $60 and bought this game basically right when it launched. So it's important to me that I get my money's worth out of this game, and I feel like that is going to be the case because there is a lot of content here. Something I'm not a huge fan of, there is actually a store where you can buy cosmetics with real currency from the Ubisoft store, which I'm not a fan of, and here is why. This is a full release title, a $60 game with a story mode. That business model makes sense if it is a free to download and play game like Fortnite, Apex Legends, Warzone, Spellbreak, Splitgate, etc. This is a $60 game. You've already gotten our money as the consumer, as the gamer. Do you really need to grab our udders and milk us further for cosmetics in the store? And a lot of these cosmetics cannot be unlocked by playing the game. Some of them can, but the majority of them you have to purchase through the store. Now, this is not performance-based. They're all cosmetic, so you're not pay to win. But it left a bitter taste in my mouth when I was scrolling through the menus and found that there is a store. Next up, we're going to talk about combat, and it is still a Far Cry game, so combat is very, very similar. What you're going to do, you're going to find a high vantage point and look down over the area you're about to attack, the base and whatnot. Use your cell phone, you're going to pin enemies and find out what their weakness or vulnerability is, as there is now an ammunition system in this game, which I kind of like because some enemies are wearing body armor, helmets and vests, so you're going to want armor-piercing rounds. Some enemies are obviously going naked. They have clothes on, but no body armor. So that's pretty cool. But other than the ammunition types, you can literally use any weapon to approach any situation. But the combat does feel very satisfying and very enjoying. I didn't really like the sound effect of getting headshots. It's kind of like the sound of fisting a jar of mayonnaise, if you guys are into ASMR. But in full Far Cry fashion, there are so many different ways to approach a fight. You can utilize stealth and climb through the bushes, or drop down from a rooftop, or take an underground passage, or you can just run in there with your amigo, directing an attack gator as you run in there, chucking Molotov cocktails, and shooting 50 cal bullets into the nutsacks of your enemies. So that is great. Also, some of the high tier unique items like the steampunk thrown together weapons like a nail gun and a flamethrower and a minigun / Gatling gun that's made out of a little lawnmower motor are pretty awesome. And the Supremo, which is your customizable backpack, your default stock out of the box one shoots homing rockets, which is really cool. You can actually use that one all the way into in-game, or there's ones that are flamethrowers, there's ones that do EMP blasts to deactivate surveillance cameras. It's really cool. It is on a cooldown, however the cooldown isn't astronomically long, so you should be be able to use it at least once or twice in a fight. And combat ties directly in with weapons. There is a ton of weapons in this game, and they are all fully customizable. Not only the performance by adding different mods or upgrades, but also cosmetically you can put a bunch of skins and also hang little charms or trinkets off the side of them. It's not quite as much as something like a looter shooter like Destiny or Borderlands, where you're constantly just like, well, there's a better gun, I don't need this one anymore. You can literally take the guns that you start the game with and run those all the way to in-game as long as you're upgrading them. Once you find a gun that you really like, you probably will keep that for the majority of the game, but there is a ton of guns. You can have 3 primaries and 1 secondary selected at once. You can also holster them when you are going into non-combat areas like towns. And then of course you also have gadgets or throwables such as Molotovs and grenades, and then your Supremo backpack. So there's a lot of equipment. But what makes combat incredibly unenjoyable, and not just combat, but the core gameplay, is the AI or artificial intelligence, not only on the enemy side, but also on your comrades or the friendlies that you're walking around with. Oh my God. Literally, enemy AI is horrendous. They will literally stand there in the open looking around as you blow the head off their friend right in front of them. They don't run around, they don't take cover. When you're low on health, they don't aggressively push you or circle around to finish you off. It's just bad. And what's more frustrating than the enemy AI is actually your comrades, because there's a lot of missions where they're trying to lead you to the next objective point and they get hung up on bushes, they get lost and start doing circles, or they just stand there when they're supposed to be walking towards the next objective for the mission. It's frustrating. The AI is bad. And there's also no difficulty selection like easy, medium, hardcore, anything like that. You just have action mode and then story mode. Story mode, think of it like easy, and then action mode is like medium. It's not hard by any means. I did die quite a few times just because I was playing super aggressive trying to rush in when I should have been taking more strategic fights. And it'd be nice if there was a harder mode where enemy AI was a little bit more aggressive and used more abilities and equipment. For example, throwing more, well, throwables such as grenades and stuff. But the lack of controllability and settings ends right there with difficulty, as this game has literally the most settings I have ever seen in a console game. You can adjust everything, and I do mean everything. I will be making a separate video going over the best settings for this game, because there are settings to help you pinpoint enemies easier, to hear them better, to see them better, and this game has the most involved button remapping I have ever seen, where you can set any function in the game to either press, hold down, or double tap a button, or a combination of buttons. So if you want to press X and square or A and B at the same time and have it do something, you can set that. It is an incredibly in-depth button mapping for a console game. But I always advise people, when you pick up a new game, the first thing you do is go through the settings. Before you even jump into the tutorial and start playing, is to go through the settings top to bottom, tip to tits, to make sure you have everything optimized for your liking. And you can get real lost in the sauce and spend damn near an hour going through the settings in this game. So what is my verdict? Is this game worth a pickup? Should you borrow it from a buddy, or should you turn your back on it and, like Anakin leaving his mother on Tatooine, just never look back?
Don't look back.
I alluded to it during the intro. This is the most fun I've had with a Far Cry game since Far Cry 2 on the PlayStation 3, and I played a lot of that game. I only played about an hour or two of Far Cry 5, and I genuinely didn't like it. Far Cry 4 was meh. Far Cry Primal was kind of gross. This is a very fun game, and I think that's a combination of the environment that you're in. They really do the whole jungle rainforest thing well. The story's good. The performance from all the voice actors, including the main character, if you go with the female protagonist, is very, very good. Also, it does have a lot of Far Cry over-the-top charm. It's kind of like the Saints Row series, where we're going to see a lot of wild stuff. For example, there's vehicles that can flip over other vehicles. You can turn a dune buggy into an aerial vehicle and take off with wings. You have a cute little dog named Chorizo that follows you around. You have an attack gator. There's just a lot of really fun over-the-top moments, and I enjoyed that. Now, what really isn't too enjoyable, in my opinion, is the fact that it is still at its core an unchanged Far Cry game, and that a lot of the content does get repetitive, even though this game, like I said, does have an overwhelming amount of end-game content. Side quests, collectibles, customization. A lot of that is the same thing with a new facelift. So there's only so many times you can take over an enemy headquarters or run into a base, kill a high-value target, and get out without being seen before it's just like, well, I've already done this before. And in proper Far Cry fashion, you are going to experience a lot of that. But I think because of how pretty the island is, and how much content is packed into the actual surface area of that map, it doesn't feel quite as frustrating and grindy as previous Far Cry games. Plugging this game into the stiffy meter, I am going to give it a 7 out of 10 bananas. Not quite enough to make a split with whipped cream and a cherry on top, but it's not a flaccid doozer either. A tasty game. This is a very, very fun game that you will spend a lot of time playing, and I would say the story is actually a standout piece here as well. But again, this game would rank a lot higher on the stiffy meter here if the AI on the enemy and the friendly side was better, and it still didn't have that grindy, repetitive nature that Far Cry games traditionally have. Oh yeah, and the cutscenes looking like they're moving under a strobe light at a disco, all skippy and glitchy and stuff. Fun game. Would recommend. Definitely worth a pickup. If you enjoyed this honest game review, liking it will help it to get seen by more gamers. This information will reach and assist them as well, help them make a decision whether this is worth a pickup. Subscribe for more content like this. I cover news in the gaming community and industry, as well as tutorials helping you get set up streaming and YouTubing and honest gaming peripheral reviews, and I will see you tomorrow because I upload daily.